Hello, it's me, Ingrid. As always, thank you for joining in. Thank you for visiting the website or YouTube, wherever you're viewing this video. I just want to thank you for taking the time out to click on the button and select me to be a part of your day. Nothing happens by accident. There's no coincidences in the kingdom of heaven. So I thank you for being here with me and for listening to me speak today. Today's topic is about boundaries. We did expectations prior. We did complaining. And I want to do boundaries. When I did expectations prior, I did the equation expectation equals boundaries. If you set a certain expectation, then the boundary will be in place. And vice versa. If you set a boundary, then you have a certain expectation. So they work synonymously with each other. How many of you know that you set boundaries? How many of you are aware that you don't set boundaries? How many of you have an issue with even setting a boundary? When I think about the word boundary, what am I thinking about? When I think about boundary, I'm thinking about a barricade. I'm thinking about something that's obstructing something else. Or I'm thinking about something that is put in place to prevent something from happening. I think the final description is the more adequate one here for what we're talking about today. When I think about boundaries, I think about putting something in place that will help prevent something else from occurring. Why do we need boundaries? Should we have boundaries? Does everybody have boundaries? Of course you do. Think about this. How many of you have ever dated a guy or a girl and you get to the date, and on the date the person doesn't hold the fork correctly? They're like grabbing the fork like this, or they're chewing with their mouth open, or they're talking while they're eating the food. Yeah. And then you get through that date and you're like, well, I'm not going to see you again. And they're like, why? And you're like, no, it's just, I think that I want to continue dating. Right there and then, you established when you saw that behavior that this is not something you wanted to pursue. In your mind, there are boundaries that exist. That person crossed the boundary. The boundary was they didn't have any manners, they appeared to be uncouth, whatever it was. Maybe something your childhood, prompted you or reminded you of something somebody did when you were a child. It doesn't matter. We have boundaries in our minds. We all carry around a scroll from this end up here to down here of the do's and don'ts that will not accept or that we will accept. There's no difference between a boundary and those expectations that you have set and have in the subconscious or the unconscious realm. So today we're going to talk about boundaries and why it's necessary to have boundaries. It is necessary to have boundaries because having boundaries promotes all the things that we're going to talk about during these videos, the seminars, the workshops, my books. It promotes self-love. It promotes self-worth, self-value. It allows you to understand the value of love outside of self. If you understand who you are and you understand what you stand for, then like they say, you won't stand for anything or just anything happening to you. So boundaries are necessary because they maintain the core of who you have determined you want to be. If you have boundaries in place, then it's very difficult for people to get away with stuff or get past those boundaries that you have put in place. One of the biggest boundaries that people have an issue with is the ability to say no. Many people cannot say no. It is one of the easiest words, 2-letter syllable, no. But people can't say it. Why can't they say no? A lot of people have problems with no because they themselves don't want people to say no to them. So it becomes a mirror effect. I treat people the way that I want to be treated, or I treat people the way that I treat them because I'm afraid of losing them for some reason or the other. Boundaries are necessary. The ability to say no is very valuable. A lot of us are trapped in relationships with people because we didn't know how to say no. A lot of us are still in those relationships because we don't know how to say no. I've had enough. No, enough is enough. So no is one of the biggest things that I've encountered as far as boundaries go. But there's other things that are affected by the lack of setting boundaries. One of those things, I talked about it earlier. I said, you put boundaries in place because you promote the value, self-worth, self-love. Most people who don't have boundaries don't understand the value of self-love, self-respect, or just the selves altogether. So how do you determine that you don't love yourself? You determine you don't love yourself if you allow somebody else to treat you a certain way based on the fact that you are unable to put a boundary in place. Boundaries are necessary. They're necessary if you want to grow and grow in a certain way. For example, I have a big thing with respect. I don't disrespect myself, so therefore I don't expect others to disrespect me. What boundary do I have in place? That's the boundary right there. The moment someone disrespects me, I have to take certain measures. I either have to cut that off, stop it as it's happening, or choose not to deal with it at all moving forward. But it cannot continue because it's a boundary that I have put in place. I can't be disrespected because I don't disrespect others. It's a reasonable expectation. Again, you see how the expectation and the boundary work together. It's a very synonymous relationship. So in counseling also, one of the other things I've found with boundaries is that there are certain segments of our population that have an issue with boundaries. People who have been abused, for example. If you suffered any kind of traumatic experience or by way of abuse, verbal, physical, mental abuse, it's very difficult for you to actually put boundaries in place. Some people may have a really good time at doing it because they've mastered the art and they've done enough counseling or therapy that has allowed them to recognize that without this boundary, that it could be a slippery slope back to where they started. So there are people who have overcome abuse and that can put boundaries in place. But for those of us who have difficulty with boundaries, maybe you never contemplated that it was because of your traumatic experience, the abuse you suffered if you were young or when you were older as an adult, that has you to the place where you're afraid to set a boundary because you're afraid of upsetting the status quo or the apple cart, as you say. So that's something to consider. Consider your narrative. What's preventing you from putting boundaries in place? That's the first thing. The second thing is the notion of not loving yourself. Why would you allow somebody else to treat you worse than you could possibly treat yourself? Or do you love this person who's treating you badly because you're unable to treat yourself badly? Why do you need to punish yourself? Why are you punishing yourself? These are all questions that you have to ask. Relationships are something where boundaries tend not to exist. Our boundaries are crossed or boundaries overlap. But the relationships that tend to work are the relationships where people understand each other's boundaries and respect those boundaries. They're necessary. If you want something, a lot of people believe that they can go out and just like going to a grocery store, you can write a list of items you need and you can go to the grocery store and pick up those items. But relationships are not always like that. You're not going to find someone who comes to you with all the groceries you need. You're going to have to either have your own inventory of groceries, or you're going to have to, you're going to have to compromise. But what you do not have to compromise is your own value system that you've created or put in place. When should boundaries be set? Boundaries should be set from the moment you enter into a relationship. That person needs to know that you don't disrespect yourself, so you don't expect to be disrespected. Let me go deeper on this. So how does that play out I letting somebody know from the beginning, I don't disrespect myself, so therefore you can't disrespect me. Think about this. How many of us or how many people have gotten into relationships and then during the course of the relationship, you found out this person is cheating on you, this person has a wife, this person has another relationship, this person is incapable of a relationship, this person is selfish, and the list goes on, but you don't do anything about it. You still engage in the relationship for whatever reason. Maybe he looked at you a certain way. Maybe in the right light, in the right day, with the right light in front of the moon, he seems like a god. Who knows why you stayed in a relationship? But the truth of the matter is that you stayed, and that is no boundary. There's no boundary set. The behavior is accepted at that point. There has been nothing said about what you will or will not accept. And even if you said it and you didn't adhere to it, then the boundary was useless. What you put in place wasn't really a boundary. It was the illusion of a boundary. It was something that you wanted to believe in, but you didn't believe in it enough to keep it in place. So you have to backtrack and figure out, are you really thinking about the boundaries that need to go in place? Do you really understand yourself enough and what boundaries are valuable to you? Do you really understand the value of the boundary in maintaining your self-respect, your self-love, and your value? That's a very interesting question. What I want to do at this point is I want you to answer those questions. I want you to do some work on yourself. Take out a piece of paper and start asking yourself, do I know who I am? Do I know what boundaries I have in place? Do I know what boundaries I need to put in place? Because boundaries are they're instrumental, but they're also very effective when used correctly. I want you to do the exercise. There'll be a part 2, and in part 2, we'll discuss in further detail why boundaries are necessary and why we have to put them in place. 1, the beginning of the relationship, or 2, when an issue in a relationship comes up and you realize then that you didn't place that boundary, now's the time to put it in place. It's not too late. Trust me, I've been there, done that. We can do it together. My name is Ingrid. Talk to you soon.